The National Fuel Gas Code, specifically NFPA 54, Section 5.22, addresses the clearance requirements for LP gas pipelines in relation to overhead electric lines. These requirements are in place to ensure safety and prevent potential hazards. Distance requirements vary based on the operating pressure of the LP gas pipelines. For LP gas pipelines operating at up to 125 pounds per square inch gauge, a minimum vertical clearance of 10 feet is required above the highest point of overhead wires. This means that the pipeline must be at least 10 feet below the lowest point of the energized electrical conductors. A minimum horizontal clearance of 10 feet is also required laterally from the nearest overhead wire. This means that the pipeline must be at least 10 feet away from the electrical wires when measured horizontally. For LP gas pipelines operating at over 125 pounds per square inch gauge, the clearance requirements are more stringent. A minimum vertical clearance of 12 feet is required above the highest point of overhead wires. A minimum horizontal clearance of 15 feet is required laterally from the nearest overhead wire. These increased distances provide an additional buffer for higher pressure systems. There are exceptions to these clearance requirements. Firstly, pipelines may be installed closer than the specified clearances if they are installed in a steel conduit or casing that is electrically bonded to the overhead lines. This bonding creates a safe path for electrical current in the event of a fault, preventing the pipeline from becoming energized. Secondly, pipelines may be installed below overhead lines if they are buried at least 24 inches deep. The earth provides sufficient insulation to prevent electrical hazards in this case. It is important to note that some local codes or utility regulations may have more stringent requirements than those outlined in NFPA 54. It is the installer's responsibility to verify the applicable regulations before beginning any work. This may involve contacting local authorities, utility companies, or other relevant regulatory bodies. Failing to comply with these regulations can result in fines, penalties, and potentially dangerous situations. In summary, when installing LP gas pipelines near overhead electrical lines, it is crucial to adhere to the clearance requirements specified in NFPA 54 and any applicable local codes. Remember that for pipelines operating at up to 125 pounds per square inch gauge, the minimum vertical and horizontal clearances are 10 feet. For pipelines operating at over 125 pounds per square inch gauge, the minimum vertical clearance is 12 feet and the minimum horizontal clearance is 15 feet. Keep in mind the exceptions for pipelines installed in electrically bonded steel conduits or casings, and for buried pipelines. Always verify local regulations to ensure compliance. These guidelines help to maintain a safe environment for both the public and those working on or near these systems. Maintaining proper clearance is essential to prevent electrical hazards and ensure the safe operation of LP gas pipelines. Always consult the most current edition of NFPA 54 and local codes for the most up-to-date requirements. Remember the 10-foot and 12-foot vertical clearance requirements, and the 10-foot and 15-foot horizontal clearance requirements. If the pipeline is in a steel conduit or casing that is electrically bonded to the overhead lines, the clearance requirements may be reduced. If the pipeline is buried at least 24 inches deep, it may be installed below overhead lines. Always prioritize safety when working with LP gas pipelines and electrical lines. Following these guidelines helps minimize risks and ensure compliance with applicable regulations. Consider this example. An LP gas pipeline is planned to run near an existing overhead electrical line. The pipeline will operate at a pressure of 100 pounds per square inch gauge, which is less than 125 pounds per square inch gauge. According to NFPA 54, the pipeline must have a minimum vertical clearance of 10 feet above the highest point of the overhead wire. It must also have a minimum horizontal clearance of 10 feet laterally from the nearest overhead wire. Now consider a different scenario. An LP gas pipeline is planned to run near an existing overhead electrical line. This pipeline will operate at a pressure of 150 pounds per square inch gauge, which is greater than 125 pounds per square inch gauge. In this case, NFPA 54 requires a minimum vertical clearance of 12 feet above the highest point of the overhead wire and a minimum horizontal clearance of 15 feet laterally from the nearest overhead wire. It is important to note that these are minimum clearances. In some cases, it may be necessary to provide even greater clearances to ensure safety. For example, if the electrical lines are particularly high voltage, or if the area is prone to severe weather, additional clearance may be required. Before beginning any work, it is essential to consult with qualified professionals, such as engineers and electricians, to determine the appropriate clearances for the specific situation. These professionals can assess the risks involved and recommend measures to mitigate them. They can also help ensure compliance with all applicable regulations. Another important consideration is the type of soil in the area. If the soil is highly conductive, it may be necessary to provide additional insulation or grinding to prevent electrical hazards. The presence of trees or other vegetation can also affect the required clearances. Trees can grow and come into contact with both the electrical lines and the pipeline, creating a potential hazard. It may be necessary to trim or remove trees to maintain the required clearances. In addition to the NFPA 54 requirements, it is also important to be aware of any local codes or utility regulations that may apply. These regulations may be more stringent than the NFPA 54 requirements, and they must be followed. To ensure compliance, it is recommended to contact the local utility company and the local building department before beginning any work. These entities can provide information on any applicable regulations and requirements. It is also important to document all work that is performed, including the clearances that are maintained. This documentation can be helpful in the event of an inspection or investigation. In summary, maintaining proper clearances between LP gas pipelines and overhead electrical lines is essential for safety. The NFPA 54 provides minimum clearance requirements, but local codes or utility regulations may be more stringent. It is important to consult with qualified professionals and to document all work that is performed.